I was asked yesterday in the Facebook group how I could possibly justify being in a gay marriage while being a Jehovah's Witness and going to the Kingdom Hall and listening to obviously homophobic discourses and talks and different conversations. And yes, growing up gay in the Jehovah's Witness faith was difficult in many ways due to the fact that out in service on a regular basis you're listening to homophobic jokes on a regular basis. Your parents talk about homosexuals in a negative tense, negative way. Everybody you know, because you're isolated as a Jehovah's Witness and you only have friends inside the faith, and so having that idea and the understanding that the vast majority of people, if they knew the truth, would hate you is in some ways terrifying. It's definitely something you think about on a regular basis. It's something you wish wasn't upon yourself because your whole world is against you. Um, and I think my coping mechanism with how it happened, the only one way I can explain it is in a systematic way because I am an ENTP. And so I'm going to use the chart to try to explain how I came to this justification of myself. And so you got to understand my temperament itself is pragmatic. And so means I'm independent, not interdependent. I don't think in right and wrong. I don't make my decisions based on right and wrong. I make my decisions based on true or false, especially since I'm a TI user, which means I do if this, then that. So I process things. So if this is true, that means I can do this. Okay. So it's all about figuring out things I can get away with and I can break their system. So ENTPs are very systematic people, and most systematic types, or the INTP is the other one, So three sides of our main mind are systematic, and so seeing systems and seeing flaws in the systems and ways to exploit it is like second nature to us. And finding out ways to get away with things is very easy for us to do because we understand what the intentions of other people, which is our strongest function, is the futures of what other people intend to do, what they may do, what's possible, what future of everything else. And so if you can picture me in the Kingdom Hall as an attendant, I was in Spanish. I was about 30 years old and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to pray the gay away. Okay, but that being aside, my own personal interests are kind of irrelevant in my life. I don't really think about myself. I think about mostly just other people's futures and what other people value. And then I process and deduce it, in a true and false manner. And I'm afraid of being uncomfortable essentially, and so when you look at the Kingdom Hall as an attendant, let me give you an example. I'm in Spanish, looking at the futures of different people and always just start like constantly speculating what they're going to do, whether or not I think they're going to have sex that night, what they're going to eat, what if they're going to stay in the congregation, are they going to pursue being a ministerial servant, are they going to pursue being an elder, are they going to pursue being a pioneer, which people can I help, who can I influence, who can I do, for this. I'm just like blah 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 blah, constantly processing. And then there's the derelicts of the congregation, the disfellowship people. And so then I need to process them too. Now, in Spanish, it's very common that people were married in Mexico, but they were living in the United States and they couldn't get married again. Okay, this was the case in my congregation. We had two cases with only 70 publishers. All right. One of the couple, literally neither of them were baptized due to this reason, because they were living together, essentially, and a common law marriage, but they were not technically married by Jehovah's Witness standards, and so they were not able to get baptized, but they were able to go to meetings and they were able to comment. They weren't able to go on to ministry and they weren't able to get baptized, but they pretty much had a normal existence in the Kingdom Hall and were accepted as one of the members. Okay, which was great because they are kind of in this niche where they got to have the community of witnesses, but they didn't have to go out in service, and they never had to get baptized or worry about getting disfellowship while they were fornicating, since they were not technically married by legal law. And so, because the man of that relationship was also married in Mexico, and he was dating Marlene, who was Honduran, and it was just a real fucked up situation, which was the case in Spanish in the United States because there was a lot of confusion, illegal activity, things like that. Most people didn't have their papers. It was just a real confusing, messed up situation. That obviously immigration needs reformed in many different ways. But and then there was another sister who was disfellowshipped. Okay, and she couldn't go back to Mexico for some reason because she had a child out of wedlock with a man who was in the States. Okay, and she couldn't get reinstated due to the fact that she could not get married to him. But she went to meetings on a regular basis, was there, sat in his back with her two children, with her boyfriend or whatever you want to call him, and she went to meetings regularly. Now, as a ministerial servant at the time, it was my job pretty much, to look around and try to figure out what people are doing, how I can help them, how I can help people advance, and things like that. And I looked at her, and in my opinion, processing it based on what Jehovah's Witness doctrine is pretty much based upon meeting attendance and what you do. She spoke well of the witnesses, and she was at the meetings on a regular basis. So I think about the future of everyone's futures, what's going to happen to everybody. So I put myself in an abstract view, a point of being God myself, and then thinking, hey, if I was God, would I destroy her for being disfellowshipped? And the answer was no. And so this woman who was disfellowshipped in the congregation, no one was talking to her, she was shunned, but she went to meetings regularly, was in a screwed up situation where she could not get married, she could not get reinstated, but she was faithful to the faith itself. And so in my mind, no, when Armageddon happens, she would have survived, she would have went into the bunker, and she would have been accepted as part of the community. That was my belief. And so when you see something like that, and then you start to process it, so if that is true, then what about these situations? What about other people's circumstances? Okay. And so if these people who I believed were going to survive Armageddon, even though they were technically sinners, were able to survive and get through Armageddon, what about my own circumstances of my own sexuality, for instance, that I could not help or fix because I was born this way and there's nothing I can do to get rid of it? I tried. I literally was one of the most spiritual people you knew for 4 or 5 years, trying to fix the things using bogus information that Watchtower wrote. And so if I was in a circumstance like this where I was not able to change my sexuality and who I was attracted to. I went through life, working hand in hand with elders who I was attracted to, elders who if they would have asked, they could have easily taken advantage of me. Um, uh, I was very sexually repressed. Now, I'm not the most sexual of people. That's not really the reason why, but I was getting very, very lonely around 30. Most of my friends by then, people know witness culture is most of my friends were married. And so it was very odd for me to be a single man at 30 in the witness faith because most guys are married by then. And so you're kind of seen as odd. Um, People are desperately trying to get you married to women at that point, and they're constantly insinuating that you need help, and that's the reason why you're not married, is because you don't know how to seduce or I don't know, enable a woman to be interested in you. Well, I never asked. I never dated. I'm not like other gay guys in the congregation who did try dating women. I'm actually kind of a rare type. I didn't ever try. I knew it was never my thing, what I wanted to do. And It was interesting about that because I got lectured. I got labeled a womanizer a few times, because I was too good for their daughter, and that's why I didn't give them any interest. I'm like, no, because I don't like your daughter in that way, you know. Yeah, I went. I was dancing with her at the party, and I had a good time. That doesn't mean I want to marry and date her, And so I have no issues with women. It's just that I'm not attracted to them, and I don't bond with them on an emotional sense in that way, you know. I only bond with other men. I'm only sexually attracted to other men, and so there was that. And so I was going through some also rough spells at the time. So I was processing things like that, and so that was kind of one of the ways I was deducing being okay with that. A couple of my other friends, I had an elder friend who was also a regular pioneer my age, who was also single, who I think is closeted gay. He got removed as an elder and then kind of started isolating himself from all of us and just started like getting really weird and trying to focus on getting um, his privileges back. Um, and then my other roommate moved away, just took off. And then another elder who I was really, really close with moved to Florida. And so I was sitting there in this congregation with a whole new elder body for the third time in 3 years. People didn't understand the circumstances. I had 5 coordinators in 3 years. 5 different coordinators. And so when each coordinator comes into a congregation, everything changes, especially when you're a servant. So all the ropes change and all this kind of stuff, and everything is done in a different way. There was coordinators I liked and there was coordinators I did not like. There's a lot of turmoil and a lot of chaos in this congregation due to the fact that there was a huge pedophilia scandal and there was factions of fighting families over how it was handled, whether or not the parents were at fault for letting their daughter wear heels and a dress, and that's why she got molested, stupid shit like that. And it was just a real chaotic time in my life. And so I went on Match.com to prove to myself that all gay people out there are reprobates, disgusting, vile humans, and that I would never ever find anybody who was not a pervert. That was what I thought of gay people while being gay. So I went on Match.com, and I talked to a few people, and it was fun, it was exciting, and there was one guy, his profile I read, who was a Christian and had a lot of interest in different biblical things and stuff like that. And seemed like an interesting type of person. He was in the Indian mounds and archaeology and stuff like that. So I was like, hey, he seems pretty interesting. And so I sent him a message, and you know, after service on Saturday, after I did the flea market cart, it was we had an office over there in Sevierville, the flea market, and I ran that. That was pretty much my responsibility as a servant to run that jw.org office over there. And after that, I called him, and I had a 9-hour conversation. And this is 30 years. Now, I told my brother about a year earlier that I was gay, but and he was actually quite accepting. He's still a witness, although he's shunning me now. Uh, I told him that he wanted to know how I felt about that. I just kind of felt like I was robbed from any kind of way of life, and that I'm considered destined, to live a life of singleness due to the fact of trying to stay faithful to Armageddon. And so that was my only conversation openly with anybody regarding being gay in 30 years. And so when I finally talked to somebody who was not a witness and was actually able to have an open conversation, just basic stuff, nothing perverted. I didn't talk about sex or anything like that. We just talked about, our stories and things like that. And he himself had been living a celibate life for about 20 years, I think, himself too. And so we had a lot in common, even though he was more evangelical. He was raised Methodist, but he was with Church of Christ for a long time and with Church of God and full of gospel, more Holy Spirit, casting out demons and crap. And so that was weird to me. But he said a few things to me that were like, that kind of triggered my conscience. And then I was like, he's right. Okay, I got to go back into my martyr complex, and I need to continue being single, because this was the course Christ set before me, to remain single and to continue the preaching work full time as a single brother, because I was given the gift of singleness and the gift of independence, which in some ways I'm actually pretty good at, is single. And in all honesty, if it was true and I actually believed the doctrine and I was not agnostic, I would return, you know, and live a single life, and that would be no problem. But a lot of things were cracking, in there, and so I told him I just wanted to be friends, and I went back into ministry and things like that for about 4 months. Okay, and then I got a temp job because I was pioneering. You have stupid jobs as a pioneer in Sevierville because there wasn't a whole lot of economy in that country town. Um, I got a temp job working in a factory, and then the factory closed down, and so then I lost my job, and then I was just kind of like, disappointed. I also spent a lot of my savings. I had $10,000 saved to go to Peru on. But I stayed in Sevierville because their congregation needed me. ENTPs get trapped very easily because we like to be needed, and we like to be wanted, we like to be valued. And so, we can get Stockholm Syndrome pretty weirdly easy. And so I had a trip to go to and I was also living with a brother in the congregation. In the congregation, I'm going to try to say this as least racist as possible, but it was very Mexican house. There was chickens and shit running around, no air conditioning, like. Although I love Miguel, and he's a wonderful person, and he made incredibly amazing Mexican food on a regular basis. But as a spoiled, decadent American, living in those conditions was really hard. Um, and so I was just kind of upset about that. My brother moved back to California, and I just was just in this congregation, stuck in Tennessee, stuck in a place I didn't like. I didn't like Sevierville. I didn't like where I was living, and it just seemed I didn't really have a lot of money, and I was just stuck in this congregation. It didn't seem to be improving at all, and I felt like I was just wasting my time. And because I needed to get out of America, I needed to go to Mexico or Nicaragua or Peru or whatever, and do some beneficial ministry, because I don't really care for shepherding. I just like to do work. And I was really good at doing literature and things like that, and just keeping the systems order and everything organized. And that's pretty much what I wanted to do, and go out into ministry and walk around and explore. That's essentially what I want to do. Dealing with people's emotional problems and trying to shepherding and try to keep people in the congregation and all that disfellowshipping stuff like that, I had no interest in that. I was really dreading becoming an elder, and I was getting really close at that point, and I didn't really want to have to do judicial committees and things like that. And so, uh, 4 months goes by, and then I was feeling really lonely on the airport because I was flying to California to make some money with my brothers. And so I called them up again, and I was just talking to him on there. And then while I was in California for 2 months, away from the constant indoctrination of my congregation, the constant beating over my head, um, I started to, have feelings for him, and that was a new experience for me. I never ever had before. Um, and so it was very confusing to have emotional attachments and feelings, and wanting to be with somebody on a regular basis. Um, I talked to him probably every day while I was in California for about 2 months straight. And then he bought me an airplane ticket to fly up to see him in Ohio. When I went up to Ohio, I told him before I went up there, I said, hey, okay, well, I'm not having sex with you. I'm not going to touch your penis. I'm not going to do oral sex. I'm not going to do anal sex. I'm not going to do any kind of sex. And what I was going to do was I was going to test and see if kissing disgusted me. I think that would be a good, clear, clean sign if I was gay or not. And because I was still in turmoil at that time. And when I got there, he picked me up. You know, kissing was very natural. It did not. I never done it before. You know, it just came naturally, and nothing was confusing about it. And you know, there was nothing. I didn't feel dirty. I didn't feel vile. I didn't feel, you know, all these things that, you know, the witness indoctrination will tell you that it is. And so um, I spent about 4 days there. And while I was in Ohio, my dad had a stroke during his surgery. And so I went back to Tennessee, and I had to take care of him for about a month. And I stayed in the hospital with him in his chair next to him, taking care of him. And the person who I was dating at the time, talking in Ohio, was moving really fast about different things like this. And I pretty much told him that I'm not so sure how I feel about this in my faith. I said, well, witnesses aren't able to, you know, have sex until they're married. And so that would at least have to happen. I think I would not have sex until marriage, you know. And so I was in the hospital and things like that. And he sent me a text proposing that, hey, we should get married then. And I'm like, you don't even know me, you know. And he's like, it doesn't matter. And I was like, well, I'm going to Nicaragua. He says, that's fine, you know, you can just be down there and then come back and visit me and things like that, and just be faithful to me while you're down there. And then he was, you know, presenting, you know, a lot of financial incentives, as well as he was a very generous person. And so, as a pioneer, you know, I never really had any generosity in the congregation. You kind of just get shit on all the time as a pioneer, even though you're working stupid jobs so you can go out and service as much as possible. Um, and so I eventually accepted the proposition, and we got married on October 20th, 2015. Yes. And Yeah, it's 2015. Sorry, I'm like double. I'm guessing. I'm like, wait a minute. And maybe it was. I'm sorry, 2016. 2016. And and so we went up to Asheville, North Carolina, and just got hitched. We had some weird ceremony that was really weird, and it was some, you know, gay marriage guy, and his name was Gary, or Jerry. Sorry, Jerry. And like, I remember both of us were kind of disgusted because they wrapped our hands with the rainbow flag and all this weird stuff, and which neither of us were really comfortable, because both of us had issues with the Rainbow Coalition in a way. Um, you know, both being Christian and self-deprecating and hating, you know, makes sense about that. Um, and so yeah, we got married on that, you know. And yeah, I had sex for the first time, you know, with a man. I'm not counting the times when I was a teenager, but and he would kept visiting down in Tennessee because he was living in Ohio, and you know, get hotel rooms and things like that. And I was just like, my parents were already used to me being gone all the time, anyways, and so you know, no one ever knew anything about it. It didn't really make any sense. Uh, there was some issues with jealousy, and he did change completely after we were married and started doing ESFJ covert contracts, which is essentially making agreements based on assumptions, not really based on discussion. And so he had an idea of what marriage was. I had an idea of what our arrangement was. I didn't really consider it marriage because at the time I did not respect gay marriage at all. So in my mind, we were not really married. We were just legally together, and so I can be a part on his insurance, and I can inherit different things and things like that. And so there was just like a financial incentives there, and he wanted to take care of me and promote me for my ministry, because I was going to go to Nicaragua and live, and then come back and visit him for 3 months. That was the original plan. Okay, then a month goes by, and he says, "Okay, I want to be a Jehovah's Witness so we can be together all the time." Okay, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And so we started studying on Skype, and or in person here and there. and we were doing about uh, I don't know, 2 chapters a week. I think was when it was going really really fast. So then he went to a meeting with us and was really impressed with the black circuit overseer because there was no racism in his mind in the Jehovah's Witness community. That's what I guess he liked about it. Although now he says, I always knew it was a cult and I only joined it because of you. And so, if that answers your question, in that sense, it was because of seeing those disfellowship people in their arrangements and something they could not fix or help, and yet I did not think they would die. And so I thought that justice and mercy would be shown to me, because I tried to do it all right, and I was living as a martyr, as a second class citizen in the Kingdom Hall. Obviously, I just told people we were cousins, and I wasn't able to like live and do have like like a real marriage family in the congregation. We were just friends, in everyone else's eyes. And uh, I do think people had their suspicions. It was pretty clear and obvious there was, some more than friendship there. Um, but as witness goes, people want to just believe what they want to believe, essentially, in the witness faith. And so my parents didn't want to believe that their son was in a gay relationship. You know, the congregation did not want to believe that their ministerial servant pioneer was in a gay relationship, and so they just looked past it. And so it was a very rocky relationship. As I mentioned, we are friends now, but we are now currently divorced. And if I would have had any kind of dating experience, like a normal person, I've mentioned other people have said this too. Witnesses have gotten married, and if they after they left the faith and they started dating a regular, they've realized that, hey, my first husband or my first wife I married, if I was dating them in a proper way, I would have dated maybe a year and we would have moved on our separate ways. You know, no hard feelings. And that would have been the case too with him, because there was definitely friction from the very beginning. I kind of knew it was a bad idea to begin with, but I didn't really have much other options. Where else was I going to find, somebody that was going to get married to me, want to be a Jehovah's Witness, and want to, you know, and then offer all the other financial and systems and protection security that I needed as a pioneer. And so our goal together was to be pioneers together, and he wanted to further the gospel message regardless if it was witness or whatever faith, and I wanted to further the witness doctrine. um, it wasn't until after I realized that I didn't want to be in the relationship anymore, and that it wasn't working and it was very exhausting to me. um, and I kind of have more of a sympathy for married couples in the congregation, because it's kind of like when you're with another witness. If this makes any sense, it's kind of like you never leave the Kingdom Hall. You're always being shepherded 24/7. And you're constantly having somebody point out different biblical things to you all the time. And so I imagine that's kind of how it is in a witness relationship, and that's why there's so much secrecy in marriages and the witnesses, because you can't be open and honest with each other because you're afraid to get in trouble. And so I imagine that's what it would be like, even in straight couples relationship. And so, yeah, to go along with this, let's just wrap up with the ENTP system. Okay, so pragmatic. I'm independent. I'm not interdependent. I don't give a damn what the community thinks is right and wrong. All I care about is what I think. Systematic. So I see flaws in the systems, and I saw flaws in the systems of Jehovah's Witness with the fact that these people were being persecuted for non-biblical reasons because of a government system that they could not help because they were Mexican living in the United States. And when Jesus was walking the earth, these marriage regulations did not exist. Okay, so how could you apply them to modern day when everything you're going by is a book that's 2,000 years old, if not more, where these legal marriages were not what they are now, as a form of taxation, essentially, and regulation by the government. Okay, so I was able to process with my TI, if that, then this. So if that's true, these people are not going to be destroyed. This applies to me, so that means I'm not going to be destroyed. Okay, FE child. My ethics are based upon what other people are doing, what other people see as right and wrong. Most people in the congregation are abusing Vicodin, Percocet, hydros. I pioneered with sisters who literally were taking hydros out in service, being strung out on heroin while doing ministry. All my elders were alcoholics, in my opinion, had a lot of issues. People watched porn on a regular basis. I knew what witnesses did. I knew people watched spiritistic movies. I knew people were gluttons. I knew people were addicted to different substances here and there. Everybody was a sinner. And so my sin was no different. And so I did not care. And so if the community is corrupt, I'm corrupt because my value systems are based upon what's surrounding me, if that makes any sense. Um, TE critic. I'm critical of what everyone else thinks anyway, so I don't give a damn what anybody thought anyways. I'm just like whatever, you know. And so if you had a problem with this and they found out, that's fine. FI trickster, again, I'm a moral type. I don't really understand right and wrong in the morality system. I have no sense of affiliative nature really. Barely can figure out, how communities work. This is why we get labeled as autistic. People put us on the outside and say, hey, these guys are weird because they don't really understand how communities work. That's true. I understand how they work in a systematic way, but not really in an interest way. I have no interest whatsoever. No interest. I have no idea why people do what they do. I don't know why they find that interesting. I don't know why they find that fun. I don't know why, anything is this way. I do things because I can. Okay. And so that's how ENTPs view things, and so that's kind of my story. I'm very thankful because of the divorce. I was able to be woken up, maybe flee, because he told the elders about us, had a document about a copy of our marriage certificate and brought it to their attention, and the elders started texting me all over the time. I just blocked them all and went to Europe. When I was in Europe, I was away from meetings. I was away from all this indoctrination. I was on my own. I was enjoying myself. I was also, for the first time in my life, also kind of experimenting more sexually versus that. And uh, it was an interesting time. And due to this witch hunt that was going on with the elders, and I was in Seattle, I was in California, and I was getting contacted by elders in all my past congregations. I've been in 8 different congregations asking me what was going on, and the elders in Mexico were telling everybody and all this nonsense. And then I got accosted in assembly hall by an elder I didn't speak to for 12 years. And it was just, everyone was acting so weird. And I was just thinking to myself, why is everyone acting like a cult? Because my plan was to go inactive for 2 to 3 years, come back, avoid the judicial committee, and just go on about my life. And that's what happens. I mean, I did it before. I was inactive for 5 years, and you come back, and they didn't really care what you did. Uh, they watch you for 6 months, and you go on with your life. So the judicial committee is the system is just flawed all around. There's just so many loopholes, and anybody who reads the other books sees these loopholes, and they're just there, And so I see systems, I know how to exploit them, and I did. I'm still not disfellowshipped. I told my ex, I said, hey, don't tell them this kind of stuff. It's going to be a kangaroo court because you're gay, and that's held differently to a different standard. It's a bigger sin to them in their eyes, and there will be no mercy. And he was disfellowshipped in his home. They didn't even let him go to the Kingdom Hall. They knocked on his door, ransacked him, and he let him inside the house. I'm like, let 3 wolves in his home, and within minutes he was disfellowshipped, and I told him that was going to happen. He didn't listen to me, which says he doesn't really matter. I mean, he lost his relationship with my mom, which hurts him, and my mother was really, really close friends with him. So yeah, so we had a family, like my family knew about him, and we all, we were married, but he was over there and friends with my mom, friends with my father, friends with my sister and my brother and the whole community and things like that. And It was an interesting time in my life. I learned a lot. I'm very thankful to him. Although, a lot of people say like, "Oh my God, he outed you to your family and got you out of the closet to them." That's like a sin in gay communities to ever out somebody who's in a closet, because people are in the closet for very many different reasons, not just because they're Jehovah's Witnesses. You are discriminated even after you leave the faith. You still get discrimination, even in the XJW community or in the community in general. Which is not a sob story. I don't care. I'm not part of the community. I never have been, and I never will be. And so that's just the life of an NT. And so I hope this helps explain how I come to that conclusion. Um, the justification I think was relevant, and it made sense to me at the time. Now I find it all preposterous and actually funny. That when the scales fall off, and then you're like awoke, and you're like you think about 35 years of belief, and you're like nothing makes sense in your life anymore. So not just the life of an XJW. So I hope this helps.